Was, and quite frankly, we didn't know exactly what we were going to find, because how could you? That was still nevertheless quite surprising. Of the 66 men that our reporters interviewed, for example, 7 of them, and these were, I think, almost all Afghans, had not only nothing to do with al-Qaeda or with any kind of terror organization, but in fact they were working for the Afghan government, which is pro-U.S. and which is supported by the United States. They were completely the wrong men. Of the 66, maybe 34 of them, about half, had been involved in some military capacity during either the period before 9/11 or after 9/11. But these were fairly, almost all of those, 2/3 of those were low-level at best, grunts, guys in the trenches, not anybody senior. And in fact, there might have been, and of the 66, maybe about 6 or 7 of them did have some links with either the al-Qaeda or the senior Taliban officials, or were somehow involved with them. But that's, only about 10%. And so what was so striking altogether was the number of people, more than half, or at least half, who had nothing at all to do with even the fighting. Many of them were picked up, only 1/3 of the people we talked to were even picked up at the time of 9/11. The others were scooped up later. It's incredible to realize how many of the wrong men we were holding. And then once you have the wrong men, what do you do with them? I think one of the reasons that torture was devised and all of these methods that your other guests have described is that if you have the wrong men, you're not going to get very good information out of them, and you may have to, somebody or other thought that they should beat them. At the essence of our report, and I think the essence of all of the discussions this morning, is the fact that the administration essentially threw out the law. They threw out the Geneva Conventions. They decided they did not apply to these people, even though they probably and almost certainly did. And once you throw out the law, you throw out the ability to differentiate between combatants, unlawful combatants, and terrorists.
Your website includes video of a number of the former prisoners McClatchy interviewed for the series. Amir John Gorshang was an anti-Taliban fighter who was freed in 2001, U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. He became a sergeant in the Afghan forces, but after his arrest was accused of planting bombs and sent to Guantanamo.
I was a soldier for Haji Kadir. We were fighting against the Taliban. We were captured and jailed in Kandahar for 5 years. When the Taliban fell and the Americans came, all the jails were liberated and the people were freed and went home. In the new government, I was an officer of the military brigade 744. Someone gave the wrong information about me. They blamed me without any reason. I was innocent. I was handed over to the Americans, and they took me to Guantanamo.
That was Amir John Gorshang. Juan?
Yeah, he mentioned being held for 5 years. On average, how long were these people imprisoned by U.S. officials?
Well, I can't actually give you the figure, but it was between 3 and 5 years. It's interesting. I mean, they were all released without charges. In fact, of the 770 men held at Guantanamo, 500 have now been released. At the very most, I think they will be attempting to prosecute 70 or 80 of them. But as a matter of fact, of the 770, they've only preferred charges, I think it's against 6 so far. This is less than 1%. It's staggering.
Haji
6 years.
Haji Ghalib Hassan was expelled by the Taliban. Returning to Afghanistan, he worked for the Interior Ministry until he was arrested by U.S. soldiers on the charge of supporting the Taliban.
I told them when they arrested me that I was an active police chief of the Guayaquil district. Before that, we captured several districts from Torkham to Jalalabad, away from the Taliban. When they arrested me, I was in my uniform, but they tore it off and brought me to the airport. They were beating me. 4 guys were standing around me and punching and kicking me from all directions. Then they would bring a bucket of water and tie me to a cot. They would turn the cot over and dunk my head into the pail of water. They would keep dunking my head underwater for 15 to 20 minutes. This American commander was watching. They were asking me to confess that I had links to Al-Qaeda. I told them, no, I'm against Al-Qaeda. I've fought against them. Someone has given you the wrong information.
Haji Ghalib Hassan, in the series of interviews done by McClatchy Newspapers, they interviewed over 60 former prisoners in an 8-month investigation. Roy Gutman, you've called Guantanamo a school for jihad, for the innocents who are there, who get radicalized.
Yes, in fact, we had one case, and this is the kind of serendipity that happens when you launch a massive project like this one. Tom Lassiter, our reporter who spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, found one man who had been sort of a small-time thug in Zormat province, and who and he was almost certainly wrongly arrested, unnecessarily arrested, and seized and then beaten on the way to Guantanamo. And when he got to Guantanamo, the various imams and radicals who were there worked on him, and he came out far more radical. In fact, he was one of the most wanted men after he was released. He became a target for the Americans. You know, at Guantanamo.
We have 5 seconds.
Sure. Anyway, there was a shura. They issued fatwas. There was like a cell, an Al-Qaeda cell at Guantanamo, and we have that from one of the commanders of Al-Qaeda.
Roy Gutman will leave it there of McClatchy Newspapers. That's it for the show. I'm Amy Goodman of Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.